Welcome back to the YouTube channel, and in this video I wanted to talk about Sadiq Kahn in the London mayoral race and talking about some of the rent cap opportunities that he's talking about. So for those that don't know, part of the big campaign is people are fed up of paying high rents in London, and he's saying that actually he's going to look at capping the rent, which overall, is it a good or a bad idea? And I'm going to be breaking that down in this video, and I'm going to say up front, I do not think it is a great idea at all. Now, what tends to happen is you have these great ideas that are just said as random statements. Yeah, we're going to do this, without actually looking at fiscal policy and the policies in general that run our economy. And so this is one of those times where I genuinely think that he's saying it from a place of trying to help people, but actually it ends up hurting a lot of people. And I don't just mean as landlords, I mean for the individuals that you're trying to help in the first place. So I'm going to offer up some opinions on this. I'll try to be as unbiased as possible, even though I clearly have an opinion on this. And I'll also offer up some ideas that I think would actually be a better proposition to getting that outcome for individuals where there's a win-win situation. So as I said, a lot of statements like this, they're said in haste, and often they're made with the best intentions. Now, I think there's an overarching problem within government anyway. I don't really like the idea of how it's become where Labour is meant to be representing the everyday person, working class, and then Conservatives, it's representing the rich, as if money is the only thing to be represented in our country. I think it creates more problems than it's worth. But often, as I said, they have unexpected consequences. So to understand overall what the problem is actually created from. So why are rents high in London? Well, actually it comes down to basic economics. It's supply and demand. And in London, there's this massive concentration of the high earning jobs, of the opportunity in the UK. Majority of the opportunity in the UK is in London. And so people want to flood there. The problem is you've got a space like this where, you know, it might have had X amount of million a few years back. Now it's like 8, 9, 10, and it grows and grows and grows exponentially. And so the demand for space has skyrocketed, but the supply of space is actually dwindling. It's still increasing, but it's dwindling in comparison. And so naturally, by basic economic supply versus demand, when there is a very small amount of supply and a huge amount of demand, naturally the competition is higher, and so prices go higher on twofold, by the way. It's not just rent, it's property prices in London as well. So people will moan about, I can't buy a place in London because it's ridiculously pricey and it's all because of the landlords. Well, yes and no. It's because there is a higher demand for space in London, which means you are getting far less for your money on a continuous basis. And it's the same in rent. I can't afford to rent in London. It's because of the landlords. Yes and no. It's because there's a huge amount of demand for a limited supply. So how do we actually fix this problem? Well, let's get to some ideas on that in a while, but let's look at what rent caps actually do in the area. So I'm not saying there's no short-term benefits at all. It probably will help people. But again, I think this is the really bad thing, or a problem that's created within government, is everyone's trying to win their period, their time in power, if you like. And so they're really focusing on rewarding the people of today, not really thinking about the people of tomorrow. But when we look at the long-term impact, actually, you know, when it's looking at supply and demand, I think these things are going to hurt the supply in the area. So impact number one is towards marginal landlords. So a marginal landlord is somebody that's just about getting by financially with their property. So there's most people that buy property in London, they understand it's not a massive cash flowing beast. And for those that aren't landlords and you're coming from a tenant's perspective, it really isn't. The amount of money going in versus the reward from cash flow is actually relatively low in London. But actually what happens is that they are relying on the capital growth in the area, which often in London does happen because, again, reduced supply, massive demand over time. But what a lot of people will start doing because of their marginal returns that are about to get marginalized or squeezed even more is it will force local landlords to go, you know what, maybe this is the time to get out of the market, and they exit and sell, further reducing supply. And you're going to see a common theme here. The more supply goes down, the higher the rents have to be to facilitate it. Impact number 2 is marginal tenants. So a marginal tenant, just so you understand the concept, is people that they could just about afford to live in somewhere in London, but actually for the rents that it's costing, they might as well just stay at home, save up and things like that. And what happens is if there's a rental decrease or a cap on rents, dependent on how it's played, of course, this will force marginal tenants to go, you know what, actually I might just go and rent a place now because it's going to be capped for the next 5 years or whatever it is if it follows Sweden or in Stockholm or New York, which I'll go through in a moment, then that's going to force people. And again, what that does is further increases demand, but more importantly, reduces supply. We're keeping with the theme. The third impact that it's going to have is illegal contracts going on. And this happens all over New York. If you don't know, they introduced this years ago and it crippled the market. Stockholm, we seem to want to follow in the footsteps rather than looking at the impact of that. A huge amount of illegal subletting going on. And so what people were doing is, because there was such a lack of supply because of this increased demand and people getting out of the market, people were legally subletting rooms at much higher rates than they were before, so therefore impacting the price overall in a much more exacerbated way than we currently have. The fourth impact that we're looking at is rental coverage. So for those that don't know, when you're a buy-to-let landlord, you have something called rental coverage, i.e. the rental amount needs to cover a certain amount of the mortgage payments. Usually we're looking at about 130%. So if it's £1,000 mortgage, it needs to be £1,300 to make sure there's enough coverage, protection, and therefore reducing the risk to the lender. If rental caps are collapsed, then either one of two things is going to happen. Either the prices of property is going to collapse in London, which I just don't see happening with the amount of money that's getting pumped in, or of course option 2 is going to be a situation where buy-to-let landlords pull out of the market and actually it stems the growth of the rental market. And whilst a lot of people seem to think landlords are these horrible beasts, you're going to really regret that when you're needing to look into more social housing aspects from the local council, which, if you don't know, is terrible quality 90% of the time, and suddenly you're not having a private landlord there that needs to provide a great service in return for your money, further reducing the supply. Finally, what you're going to see is impact number 5, and this is development. So what you've seen over the years is this massive race of build to let properties, especially in London. So what people have done is they've tried to reduce their development costs as much as possible, trying to get through every planning loophole they can to build new homes, because the ultimate problem is supply. And again, what's going to end up happening with developers that have been focusing on this build to rent model, that suddenly there's no viability financially to do them. And again, the short term thing is, screw you, you shouldn't be doing it anyway, is, well, no, screw everyone from that, because no longer a home's going to get built. And the problem with this is, if you're in Liverpool, Leeds, Manchester, all of that, if it's happening in London and it does get passed, imagine the expansion through this with the UK, which will happen over time, okay? So actually it's going to reduce the development of new rental products, again, further diminishing supply. Not looking so rosy after all. So look, am I saying it's an absolute no-no? Yeah, actually I am. I think it's a stupid idea. I think it's ridiculous. And by the way, I don't care from a perspective from my capitalist mindset of an individual, but the capitalist mindset of the country. It has been tried in other countries, in other cities, and it's been terrible. It's really impacted the city in a negative way. And if you look at Stockholm, you've done that, and it's been a terrible impact, and looking at reversing that, it's a silly idea just to appease the average person. I don't have the final solution to this, but I think a mindset shift is what needs to be there. The thing that government seems to do to win a vote is to get you riled up and rallied. You need anger. Okay, and the way that governments will do this a lot of the time is direct your anger. So as a tenant that's struggling with rents, their answer is, it's the landlords, it's them charging you rents, let's get that down. But actually, the problem with that mindset for the development of the country is it stems it, because whilst you appease one side, you piss the other off. And in this situation, you're trying to appease the voters in that situation to win, but actually you're crippling the town, and so you're not looking at the overall impact of that, which is just my humble opinion. So what are some ways to actually benefit? Well, first of all, like I said, there are win-win situations in this, but I guess win-win situations don't get the vote. So what would I do? So number one is down to the individual, and you're not going to like this, but suck it up. That's option number one. If you can't afford to live in a certain location, don't live there. And I can hear people go, oh, it's all right for you to say. Well, it's exactly what I did. I lived in central London. I couldn't afford it. And so my answer to that, whilst I wasn't earning that amount of money, is I sucked it up. So first of all, I lived in a shitty flat, okay, that was a flat share, should have been a 1-bed, but I was actually in 4 bedrooms in that, okay? And I rented a room there to be able to afford it. And then when I was going to live in central London, I just couldn't afford it at that time. And so instead of moaning about my environment, I changed my environment. An unpopular opinion, but that is definitely number one. Number two, I would definitely help developers. Now, you might think these big development companies are absolutely killing it, but they actually work off of really small margins, and the planning process is archaic. It can take years to get through the planning process to build something that is going to seriously positively impact. So if I were in power, what I'd be looking at is liaising with locals to work out, actually, what would you be happy with? What sort of designs are you looking for? What sort of homes would be adding to the environment around you? Because let's face it, there's some bloody ugly buildings that are put up as well that we all hate. But what would be an amazing addition to your environment that you would be happy with? Because if we can reduce the planning criteria and the planning archaic process that's there and help people create great sustainable homes, then that increases supply. Okay, and as that supply increases, theoretically over time it will balance out. Whereas at the moment, demand here, supply is there and getting lower and lower, which is what's going to be the impact of what's proposed. But if we can even increase the supply to here, it's really going to start balancing that out so everyone can benefit. The next one is, I'm in two minds about this, but I'll say it openly, is restrict foreign investment coming in. Now, it is actually a massive benefit to the overall economy, so I doubt it will stop. But if we're looking after locals, then look local first. It's kind of like these charities that focus abroad. It's great, it's amazing, but we've got a lot in our country to sort out as well, okay? And I think we need to focus on both. And so if you're really trying to help the local individual, then it's the foreign investment that really drives up prices in the first place. The problem with that is it drives up the purchase demand, which drives up the purchase price, and as you drive up the purchase price, you need more rental coverage because of the mortgages, and if you need more rental coverage, you have to charge more to get your return on capital employed. So actually, what you need to be focusing on is not so much pushing the demand in already existing buildings. You need to create new buildings, new homes for individuals, and really push in that. So instead of trying to reduce in some way over here, why not make contributions over here that can help sustain the viability of London and the home process, where people can actually rent a great home for a reduced price because there are more homes available, instead of looking at a short-term win to get into the mayoral election, getting the win in, and potentially crippling the housing economy in London for the next decade or so. And so my hope is that nothing like this is going to go through. And again, for me, I don't really like talking politics, but We need to shift away from there needing to be a winner and there needing to be a loser in order for a winner to be created. The truth is, in the economy, there are situations and fiscal policy that can be put in place with the ultimate goal of everyone winning. And do you know what? People going, oh, it won't work because of this, it won't work because of that. There's always pitfalls that we can't understand before we actually implement something. But why not go out with a mindset of a win-win situation that we're aiming for, rather than a win-lose situation at the best case situation or outcome from the beginning? And instead of having this short-term mindset to get a win and a pat on your own back whilst crippling the economy, I actually think that's incredibly selfish to the country. And all you need to do is do some research, spend an hour or two actually understanding the economics of this to figure out why it's not a great idea, instead of trying to appease the average person. So, do I have the overall answer to everything? No, of course not. I just don't think this is the right course of action. And so for me, I'd be looking at the growth of the economy to facilitate lower prices, rather than crippling the economy and the supply, which it doesn't take a genius of economics to understand. If you cripple the supply even further, what is that going to do to prices over the long term? Seems pretty obvious to me, but that's just my opinion. I love, and genuinely, whether you agree or disagree, it doesn't matter to me. I'd love to engage in conversation with you. So honestly, what are your thoughts on it? What do you think the impact would be? And more importantly for me, if you were having a positive, proactive output to this, what would you do? What would be your option? Let me know in the comments. And hey, if you got value from this video, hit the like button. If you're not subscribed already and you want to have some no BS property investment advice, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. And of course, I'll see you in the next video.